Welcome and welcome back to this next session of the Day of the Climate Professional. My name is Stephen Carlson, and it is my pleasure to be here supporting this virtual panel discussion. For those just joining, welcome to this, the inaugural edition of the Day of the Climate Professional. We're excited to have you here with us. Today is a date to celebrate, to convene, and showcase the many climate professionals working across industries, sectors, and boundaries, while calling on others to join this critical work to accelerate solutions to our biggest challenge, the climate crisis. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce the following climate professionals who will elaborate on their peers and colleagues across the private sector taking decisive action by declaring a climate emergency. With us today, we have Kate SANDLE, Director of Programs and Engagement at B-Lab UK and Director of Business Declares. We also have CHARMIAN Love, co-founder and chair at B-Lab UK, an entrepreneur in residence at Saïd Business School at the University of Oxford, and Kaya AXELSSON, Net Zero Policy Engagement Fellow at the University of Oxford. To facilitate this discussion, we have with us today two inspiring young climate professionals, both a part of the Youth Climate Leaders Global Network. I'm excited to introduce Manoj Kumar and Marina Porto to set the tone and facilitate today's session. Marina, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. So my name is Marina. I am a Brazilian economist and I hold a master's degree in environmental and natural resource economics at the University of Copenhagen. I'm currently based in London, where I work as a sustainability consultant at SOFIES UK, helping companies and business to work in their sustainability transition. And I am a YCL fellow, so I was part of the 2018 immersion and also a bit of the 2019 one in Germany. And I'm also the current co-chair of the Youth Policy Advisory Council of the Sustainable Ocean Alliance, where we promote awareness and lobby and try to structure policies, mainly focused on seabed mining and the Blue New Deal. So it's very hands-on action. And I think that is important for business to step up on climate, because the private sector is one of the main stakeholders related to climate change. So they are not only responsible for a big part of the greenhouse gases emissions that happen throughout supply chains, both for services and products, but also bring a lot of pollution if the waste management is not done properly, and also responsible for the extraction of natural resources for the production processes. So, but not only the bad things, right? So the business sector can also innovate. And this transition to innovation very fast, way faster than the public sector can. And I think this has a very big potential to create positive impact. So stepping up means sending a signal to both society and policymakers that it is possible and that they care. So they can generate engagement through all levels. So that you create demand for new products from consumers, you can engage your competitors in acting different, and you can challenge the status quo of the current policies in place. So I think it is very important this, and also in line with the playbook that our colleagues here are gonna present very well. I think it is important for companies to make a thorough assessment of their impact and the risk related to climate change and work on restructuring their business models. So we already have companies working zero waste strategies and using sustainable products on their supply chains. And I think this is great, but there is still space for more ambition on this area. Thank you.
I am Manoj Kumar. By profession, I am an electrical engineer. And after working for 3 years in different corporations, I was getting in a constant inner calling, to switch my career to the social sector. Then I joined a fellowship program in Bangalore, and I was deployed in a rural area to work on a unique river rejuvenation project. And I was responsible to work with the community members and to promote agroforestry. So basically, I was working on the demand side management of the water conservation work. And when I was working with the community members, I realized everyone is affected by the climate change. The villagers were not getting the water. They need to dig the borewell to the 1,000 feet, and you are not sure that whether you will get the water or not. So of course, I was very happy that I was part of this solution, but I was thinking, to take it to the large level. And what I felt, that only the corporations can come together, when the farmers are integrated with the supply chain, and that too, let's say the green supply chain, then, we will be able to tackle the climate change very positively. And hence, I was looking for some kind of opportunities where I can integrate the farmers with the market. And right now, I'm working with Verstegen Spices and Sauces, which is based in Rotterdam. And we are actively looking to source our raw materials grown under sustainable model, let's say called regenerative agroforestry model farm. So yeah, and as I completely agree with Marina, my colleague, uh, private organizations bring innovation, and they are the first to bring the latest technology and to deploy in this society, to benefit the society at large. So I'm very very happy to be part of that of one company which is actively working to mitigate the climate change, to bring everything on green supply chain, and looking forward on the lines of sustainable development goal. Apart from this, I just wanted to share one more thing. I have been part of the youth climate leaders, and I was in the Germany during the immersion program in 2019, and I have learned a lot. And today I have received this opportunity to be in this panel discussion. I'm very grateful, and looking forward for this the next 40 to 45 minutes of this discussion. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Acknowledging, both Marina and Manoj, your stories and your leadership. And I was really quite moved by how you followed a calling. And I think, Manoj, you actually sort of, it's an inner calling, and you listened to it. And you didn't just listen to it, you acted on it. And I think both of your stories of the work you're doing and how you're moving from thinking, conceptualizing some of the challenges and opportunities to change that are out there, to actually doing something about it. So whenever I see people that are able to go from the thinking to doing, I think it's really important to acknowledge it, because that is a really important step to go for. And I think we need to get more and more people mobilizing. So we need to get people to think, and we need to get people to act. So thank you for your leadership, and thank you for modeling what that looks like as young people. And it's certainly something that all people, I think we all need to do. I also just really want to quickly reflect with some of the things I heard from both of you. I mean, Marina, I heard you talk about, again, that business is responsible for climate change, and that there's this opportunity to innovate. And Manoj, you also talked about the power of technology and how we can sort of harness it. And I really agree with both those pieces, actually, which is one of the reasons why I am so excited to be connected into the B Corp movement. And I'd love to share a little bit more about what we're seeing in the B Corp movement, as well as some of the materials and tools that we're pulling together. And I know that both Kate and Kaya will share more specifically on some of the additional work in community and some of the ideas that are emerging around how we can really get as many materials out to businesses as quickly as possible, so that we can mobilize them, and so that they can be part of what I know sometimes is referred to as an ambition loop. And Marina, I think this picks up on your point. It's like, almost, how do we get the private sector to really get going, and hopefully then mobilize through their action government and civil society. But I actually don't think it's necessarily as sequential as that. I think the ambition loop is something that we all, like, wherever we are in the world, whatever sectors we're operating, and we all need to figure out how we step up and level up the work that's happening when it comes to addressing the climate emergency. So, and Manoj, one of your points about bringing together people, that really, really resonated with me, because I think that's kind of, that's one of the core things that's going to help us really sort of achieve what needs to happen, is the individual actions we take as people, as businesses, but actually how we work as a collective and how we partner and think about a full systems view. That's where the change is really going to happen. So let me just share a few remarks, because actually I realize I've used a lot of my time to reflect, and actually I feel like, because you both have said such extraordinary things, I really wanted to sort of lift them up and sort of really sort of amplify your important messages. I think the only, two things I would want to share in terms of the work that I'm getting excited about in the B Corp movement is one, I think we've been really enchanted. I don't know, Kate, if you would agree with this word. I'm going to use it and you can tell me if you have a different word, but I've been enchanted by this, phrase from Sir David Attenborough. And he said that when it comes to climate change, we cannot be radical enough. And I think, you know, I'm really trying to hold that word radical and really trying to think about how do we stretch ourselves? How can we really, really move further, faster together? So for those of you who may not be as familiar with the B Corp movement, what B Corps are for-profit businesses that have been certified by B Lab because they meet the highest standard in terms of both how they operate and what they're in the business of doing. So what their business model is. They also change their legal articles to make it explicit that as a business, their directors' duties must be to equally consider shareholders and stakeholders. And those stakeholders include workers, the supply chain, the partners in the local community, and the environment, and future generations by way of their environmental footprint. So we have this amazing community of businesses that are really walking the talk and really sort of using their business as a force for good. And we know that there is a climate emergency. So one of the things we have done within this community is set up a challenge. And the challenge is let's be radical. We know that there is a series of net zero targets, that different commitments that companies are making. And we wanted to say to our community, let's sort of be leaders in this space. So right now we have, I think, nearly 800 businesses that have made a net zero commitment, and they've made that commitment to be net zero by 2030, which is pretty exciting. And we know that there's a lot of work to do, and that includes really going deep into business model discussions and really looking at the strategy of those businesses. But what we're also doing is recognizing those businesses are not alone, and we're trying to really create and cultivate a community of businesses that can work with one another. And some of the ways that we know we can do that are through establishing climate collectives where people can share information and share tools, but also generating tools of our own to really sort of support those businesses. And I just wanted to share, I think that's the second point I'd wanted to make, was one of the first tools that we developed for these B Corps, but actually for all businesses that wanted to take meaningful action addressing the climate emergency, is the playbook. And I know Kate can talk a little bit about it as well, because she and I kind of knocked our heads together quite a bit to try and sort of put it together and sort of think about, if we were in the position of a business, what are the sorts of things that we feel like we would need in order to really, really move forward, again, with the sort of sense of we need to be fairly radical with how we think about what we do and how we do it. So maybe what I can do is just headline a few things, because maybe we can link in the chat or link somehow to the playbook for anyone who wants to look more through it. But let me just share a few little headlines and highlights from it. I think the thing that we tried to do in the playbook was really to be really tactical. Like, here are the actual steps you can take as a business, and sort of set things up. You know, we really know business need to communicate internally, like what's happening with the climate emergency, and get sort of employees and workers to be understanding what this is all about and why it's important for the business to take action. So I feel like I've got like step by step by New Kids on the Block in my head. So it's like step one. And then the second step is to appoint a transition team. So recognizing that to do the level of change that's needed, we'll need team-based activity and coordination. So really trying to figure out who are the right people to lead that process. Obviously, it's about setting targets and making those targets are science-based. You know, to your point, Marina, like really it has to be at the business model level. So there's a really important piece about looking at how your business actually is structured and how it creates value, and looking deep into how that can be reflected in your climate emergency plan. And then ultimately, because we know this is about a culture change, have to find ways to share the story of what you're doing. So those are sort of some of the steps you'll see in the playbook. And also what we tried to do is showcase some of the businesses that are already doing this. So one of the great case studies is Pukka. This morning here in London, so I've got my Pukka tea. They're one of our certified B corporations that have really been on the front foot with a lot of this. And they have got some extraordinary things that they're doing in terms of how they're looking at net zero, and including looking at sort of their sort of way scope 3 emissions. So really encourage looking at stories like Pukka and many others that are really taking action. But as I said, it's about collective action. So it's about how do these businesses also work together and engage more widely. And we have a whole piece in the playbook, which is really around listening and engaging with young people. I think, and I know that's something that Kai is going to pick up in her remarks, but hopefully that's enough of just a little bit of sharing of the B Corp movement, our net zero 2030 mobilization, and some of the playbook that we have developed. I'll just note that we have a couple of other toolkits and playbooks under development that we're hoping to share quite soon, including one on regenerative business models. So stay tuned for that one. And it's really great to be here this morning. Thank you for your questions and opening framing remarks. I'm excited about the dialogue we're going to have a little later on.
So yeah, I wear two hats, and I'm just going to echo a little bit of what Shah just said, and then kind of loop into what Business Declares does, and what we're hoping to achieve. And just, I sometimes think it's really practical to give you some examples. And so Shah talked about Pucker, but also just to talk about other businesses who are taking really bold action to achieve complete change. So we talked about business models and shifting business models and the circular economy. You've got lots of businesses who recognize, especially when it comes to packaging, what does that look like? What's the end of life look like? So there's a couple of B Corps who have moved to a circular model. So Beauty Kitchen have done that, and also Dopper, which make refillable water bottles. But understanding that actually what they can do is capture the value within their packaging and instead be able to use refills instead. And so that's a really great example of businesses shifting their business model to different areas. Pucker are absolutely brilliant. And when we touch on regenerative agriculture, which I think is a really important area that often gets forgotten when we're talking about carbon and declaring a climate emergency, there are lots of different businesses doing some great stuff, but Patagonia, worldwide seen as one of the leaders when it comes to this stuff, and also Dr. Bronner's, who make incredible soaps, were the key players in creating the regenerative organic certified standard. And so they're kind of taking what they're doing as a B Corp and actually extrapolating that and then creating another standard, recognizing that regenerative agriculture is really important. Innocent is another really interesting business that makes incredible smoothies, and actually what they did is they recognized that they needed to build a factory, and first of all their factory they realized needed to be carbon neutral, so that was really key in being able to build that factory. But on top of that, they were thinking about where the factory should be placed. And they're a UK-based business, but recognizing that a lot of the fruit comes into the port of Rotterdam, how can they reduce their supply chains? How can they ensure that the transport time is massively reduced as a result of it? And they've built this factory in Rotterdam. So they're kind of double whammy, reducing their carbon through distribution and logistics, but also through their factory as well. And then two other B Corps that kind of link quite nicely to Business Declares. So Business Declares, just to give you a bit of an intro, is a volunteer-led network created a couple of years ago, recognising the importance of businesses declaring a climate emergency. So very related to what B Corp does and the playbook that we did, and just wanting to open it up and ensure that every business realises how important it is to declare a climate emergency, how important it is to set interim targets, and how important it is to be public in that declaration. And that's really key, so you can be held to account. And so we've created this organisation with lots of different volunteers all over, trying to create change. So we're a network, and we also highlight and create resources, and then we host workshops and events. And there's lots of different B Corps who have also declared a climate emergency, and there's a lovely crossover between the two, and hence the reason why I wear two hats. So two, which I think are really brilliant, is Leap. And Leap, really interestingly, relocated their office because they recognise the travel time for a lot of their employees to get to their office. They're in Cornwall, in this beautiful place, right at the end of England. And what they saw was actually if they relocated to a more central location, not only could their office building be more sustainable, but it massively reduces the travel time of all of their employees. And then the other business that I think is brilliant, which is Whole Grain Digital. And Whole Grain Digital have tried to create a website calculator, recognizing that no one really understands the carbon emissions of their website. They've also encouraged all of their employees to move to renewable energy. And when they've moved to renewable energy, they give them a day's holiday, or they give them £200, which is absolutely brilliant, incredible way to encourage your employees to also shift to renewable energy. But there's another area that I think is really important that we don't focus on, and Whole Grain Digital have been instrumental in this, which is recognizing digital footprints. So iterating on the website calculator is actually looking at how much does a Zoom call impact the environment. You know, we've all shifted to that, and I've got some stats here, and what Business Declares is trying to do is create a toolkit with Whole Grain Digital to understand what businesses can do. And one of the biggest challenges here is that the data isn't available to really understand the footprint of a Zoom call, to understand what we're doing. The really massive tech companies aren't talking about this stuff. So how do we capture that data, and how do we acknowledge it as we move into an increasingly online digital world? What's that footprint going to look like? And the reality is that actually the aviation at its peak was 2% of global emissions. Now, the digital footprint, global digital footprint now is 3%, so it's higher than aviation. And so if we don't start thinking about this and really addressing it, what does that look like? And I've got a couple of really scary stats that I want to put out to you guys, because I think it's really important we start talking about this, start asking more questions, and kind of really thinking about what we can do. So thinking and then acting, exactly what Shah was saying, which I think is really important. And that's try what we do with Business Declares and with B Lab and B Corps, is to encourage businesses to really reflect on the impacts they're having on people and planet. So my two stats, which I think everyone remembers once you hear them, which is if Ronaldo, and the footballer, I'm guessing, posts one Instagram photo to his 239 million followers, it's enough for putting 10 houses on the UK grid for a year, which is mental. I hadn't realised that. I know, it's crazy. And then the other thing is Netflix, which I rely on, so many people rely on for their evening entertainment, because we can't do anything, especially in the UK. It's in mega lockdown at the moment. Is if you watch 1 hour of Netflix, it's the same energy as putting 2 fridges on for a year. So we talk about this stuff. There's so much that we need to recognize and reflect on, and we kind of feel like we can sit back and we can use the internet, we can use cloud technology, but actually if it's not being put and run by renewable energy, if it's not being stored, if it's being stored in really hot places, which is one of the biggest challenges, then actually it needs a huge amount of cooling system. So what does that look like, and how do we recognize that this is a bigger shift? Just to not end with really big mega problems, just some advice that I've been given, because I think that's always really important. So keep your phone, keep your laptop as long as possible, buy refurbished instead of buying new. Clean up and delete all of the old stuff you don't need on your computer. I know I'm very guilty of that, and especially photos and so many different things. That's one of my biggest challenges. So don't stream unnecessarily. It's a really big challenge, and I think, you know, there's a way up between mental health here and not. But actually, when we're looking at the screen for so long, how about reading a book? I don't know. Try and use Wi-Fi more than 3G. That's another thing. And don't forward on emails and bulky attachments. So responding with thanks or yes to an email, you know, maybe there's a thing that we should all start, instead of putting don't print this email, which I feel like is a bit old, we should put as a little footer, if you need me to respond, thank you, then I won't, or something. I don't know, that's probably a bit harsh, but there's a different framing that we need to get into for all of that stuff. And with that, I'll stop talking.
I have to respond to what Kate has just said. I hope that's okay. I mean, I just think that the digital footprint issue is such a big issue that should be avoided by businesses doing the right thing. And when I mean businesses doing the right thing, I mean businesses who are tech companies signing up to the Renewable Energy 100 pledge. And I mean governments and utility companies working together to move to renewable energy, which is, if not cost competitive, cheaper than coal, oil, and gas at this stage. There's no reason. Electricity does not need, you know, natural gas or anything. It's not like heating. We can switch immediately. So I did my MPhil thesis. I did a master's at Oxford before kind of jumping into this net zero business space. And what I found was that there were really beautiful coalitions, beautiful political coalitions on the right and on the left in North America that were helping move utility companies to 100% renewable energy. And I don't want young people today worrying about, you know, should I not send that email, or should I not eat something? You know, I want young people today sending 2 extra emails to their local utility company and asking, are you 100% renewable? I want them going to their utility commissioner. And I want them to ask all of the hard questions of any business in their environment, whether it's where they get their power from, whether it's their school, whether it's their future school or university, whether it's their future employee or employer. So I think that actually we should be putting the responsibility where it is. And I think young people today are really waking up to that. I think the Sunrise Movement has done a really good job of asking hard questions of the people in power to shift the frame of what is not only possible, but what is considered radical enough or considered a standard policy. Just to give you some numbers on that, in the recent election, in the recent US election, I'm from the US, although I grew up very near Canada. In the recent US election, what we saw was like an incredible increase in dialogue about climate and the environment. It shot to a sort of honorable mention by some candidates in the previous election cycle into what is, I think, probably one of the top 3 concerns that at least the Democratic candidates are citing. And honestly, the opposition has to talk about it as well as a result. So I think that just to give you some numbers on that, it used to be that you would talk about kind of a climate plan as something that we might do, or you would talk about a particular part of it. But now we are not only considering, you know, how many millions should go into that climate plan, but how many trillions. And that was the major difference between the primary presidential candidates. And that was because young people went out and made it their full-time job to interrupt candidates at public forums. And I know that this conversation is about business, so I'll stick to what you can ask of business leaders. So I still work at the University of Oxford. I graduated and never left, but I left in many ways because my job is to do engagement, bringing the climate science and the facts on climate change to policymakers and companies. And so basically what that means is we know we need to get to net zero by 2050. We know we need to get there much, much sooner, especially if we are in the global north, right? And we think we know why. So that means that every company in our space, like I said, you probably attached to 16 companies if you just think about it quite quickly, needs to have a good net zero strategy. And I think that the B Corps are really leading the way on that. I'd like to see everyone move as quickly as the B Corp movement has in the past year since they declared a climate emergency and a net zero target. But so here I wrote an article in The Independent to kind of help people ask the right hard questions about net zero, because I think often where people stop in their engagement or in their campaigning is saying, well, I don't know as much as the people in power, so why should I ask the question? Well, it doesn't matter. You're there to find out information and be delighted that you don't know as much. Be curious. Let them kind of take in your curiosity. But here's a few questions to just get you started. So first, if you're asking a company about their net zero target, you could say, oh, what does that cover? Or what emissions are you counting? And that's a nice open-ended question. Then you can kind of gather the response. If you need to drill down further, you could say, what scopes? Now, scopes talk about sort of the jurisdiction, that sort of think about concentric circles. So a scope 1 would be sort of direct ownership. So that, the company's utility bill would be in, that's actually scope 2. So scope 2 is like, let's say it's not directly on site, it's the utility bill. Scope 1 is just like, okay, what is my building? What are my direct products and things? And then scope 3 is like my commuter emissions or emissions associated with my business. So my business can't run without these emissions happening, but am I as a company owner necessarily doing them? So we kind of want, because businesses couldn't run without those associated emissions, we want businesses to be thinking about them because it's all sort of in their bubble. So you can ask what scope. You can ask if you're covering everything like within your ownership or outside of your ownership. And don't worry if you get kind of like the scope terminology right. It's very confusing, I think, depending on what sector. So just say, what are you covering? Is it just the emissions you own? The emissions are supposed to ask more questions. Young people are really good at asking questions, and I think that we can add a lot of value in doing that. The second thing you can ask about a net zero target is, what is your deadline? So we know that because we have the Paris Agreement, in which all the nations came and agreed to net zero by mid-century, but that means that some nations and some countries and some companies have to go first, because we really need the developing world to have a little bit of extra time, because it's just simply not fair. Not only are they dealing with the worst climate impacts, especially in the global south, but they're also probably going to need some of the economic benefit of those technologies having been developed so that they can catch up. So it's just really, really important that also, just from a science perspective, 1.5 and 2 degrees, which is what a mid-century 2050 target would get us to. I mean, Africa is going to be 1.5 in 2023. It's just not fair. We're not talking about the same thing. So we really need to think about equity when we think about a deadline. And you can go and say, you know, I think probably like the best available science shows us that for parts of the world, it's not soon enough to have a 2050 target. Could you maybe move up your 2050 target if they have that? What about 2035? That seems reasonable for at least scope 1 and 2 for most companies. And the third question you can ask is, how are you getting there? So the net in net zero often refers to quite a bit of offsetting. So let's say that people have calculated their emissions, but they're not sure that they can reduce all of them. You want to ask companies, how are you getting all the way to a place where, you know, every ton of carbon that goes up is also coming back down and is being stored somewhere? And you want to ask hard questions about that offsetting. You know, is it verifiable? Is it long term? Are you paying enough for it? And you want to reduce as much as you can before you offset is usually the rule of thumb. And then your question 4 that you can ask companies is, what are you doing? Borrowing from Greta Thunberg, act now. This is not a long-term target, right? This is, as Kate said, a target with interim targets. And 5th, how are you going to ensure that this plan happens? It's a 30-year plan. How are you embedding it in your governance? How are you scaling up and skilling up the people in your departments to be able to make a wholesale change and act like this is an emergency?
Okay, so my question is first to Kaya. So I would like to ask, you know, since you are working to bring the research and policy to the organizations, so what kind of research and policy you would like to bring, especially in terms of packaging, sustainable packaging, because less than 10% are being recycled. So could you share some insights on that? You know, how the big corporations or even the small corporations should take it up and move forward? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Packaging is a really important and tough one, particularly because it's not always as intuitive as we'd like it to be. You know, I've seen a report recently, and this is not to say that you should continue using plastic bags or anything and single-use unnecessary packaging. But I saw a report that showed, and it was from Oxford, that showed that actually keeping some of the plastic film over fruit and vegetables in stores can preserve the food for much longer. And from a carbon perspective, like, we actually need to make sure that food doesn't go to waste, because the carbon associated with growing food and getting it all the way to you is a consideration. That means, however, that we just need to innovate what kind of film is going over that food. So Oxford has a research program called The Future of Plastics, and we're looking at alternative plastics. And you know, I feel like it's every day online you see a new brilliant, probably young, probably female entrepreneur who's come up with a cactus plastic or a seaweed plastic. Now these are already on sale, right? So let's just be clear that, once again, just like with renewable energy, the solutions are there. It's just about scaling them. So what we're saying is that we need money and we need investment at a scale to help bring these solutions to a market. And that means we need companies to be putting in kind of pilot programs. So for example, there's this company that uses seaweed-based plastic. And what's beautiful about it is they're actually going around to like marathon runners, and they're these nice little packets, kind of like a seaweed pod, but they're crystal clear. They look like, you know, a package of plastic, except for you can actually eat it. Right? You can swallow it. It's so biodegradable. It's so nice. So they kind of started off their company by handing out these free pods of water to marathon runners, and then the marathon runners could just pop it in their mouth and drink it. Now, that's probably not going to work for like a long haul. If you want to store plastic for like a year or 2 years, that probably disintegrate and then you'd have water everywhere. But the thing is that so much of what we do just turns over. I mean, it's so upsetting sometimes when you think about, like, this plastic that's built to last for 100 years is just getting used and tossed within a week, right? And these pods could be used. I mean, they don't have to be pods. They could be like packets at a higher scale. That's just one example. So I think the answer is in taking and finding those entrepreneurs and those solutions, and recognizing that there's also a carbon cost to our plastic problem. Our business as Oxford produced a report recently that showed that our business as usual response, in which we've relied on pretty much one solution, which is to recycle, it has bulged, and we can't contain it anymore, right? We've got countries in the global north selling or just sending, without even asking, their recycling to countries in the global south to burn for them. I mean, that is an example of really, really disrespectful plan that you know, you don't. And it's not to say that you shouldn't recycle, because I think that there are certain governments in certain places, and you should look up the rules where you are. I mean, I hate when people think, oh well, I just shouldn't recycle. It's just not the only solution we can rely on. Some recycling is really good because it is part of like a circular economy, right? Some recycling is going into a place where people are reusing those plastic bottles for tons of different things, which we know we should be doing anyway. So that's one solution. And then I think alternative plastics is another solution.
Maybe just to add on to that, so we've got a plastics and packaging working group, recognising that the challenges that so many different businesses face is to keep things fresh, kind of as Kaya said, at the moment they haven't found the scalable solutions to be able to do it, or they haven't, as single individuals, when there's so much work to be done, been able to navigate this space, which is so complicated, especially when people put compostable and biodegradable on things, which are just totally ridiculous because no one knows how to do that. And especially in the UK, the recycling and the composting facilities are totally different depending on where you live. So coming together as organisations and recognising the opportunity to learn and share and to innovate together. And something actually you said earlier, Manoj, about integration and understanding that one of the big things at the B Corp movement is the interdependence of everything that we do. So working together, recognising that everything we do touches other things, which touches other things, and actually we need to keep that in mind when we think about innovation. But yeah, so there's a lot of work to be done, and labelling, I think, is a big challenge.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. My question can be for the three of you, is like however you feel comfortable with. But I wanted to know, how do you see the importance of circular economy for this business transition? And right now, what is the biggest challenge that you see for companies to achieve this, both circular economy and furthermore to achieve the B certification?
Maybe can I jump in on that one, Marina, if that's okay? Because actually, in my role at the business school, I've had the real great pleasure of teaching an MBA elective on circular economy, and actually this year is going to be the fourth year that we're going to be offering it. And one of the things that's really great in that class is that we try and bring in a lot of practitioners. So we sort of pair the research and sort of the deep sort of academic review of what's happening in the circular economy with people that are doing it in practice, from big companies to small companies to investors we try and have a bit of a policy discussion as well. And I would love just to share really briefly, one of the things we did last year was we actually renamed the class. So it had been the circular economy. But last year we were really picking up an emphasis on an element of the definition of the circular economy that feels really important to be explicit about, which is regeneration. And so we now call the MBA class the regenerative and circular economy, and they let me put a tagline on it which fits to the sort of spirit of what we're talking about, because the full name of the class in the curriculum is the regenerative and circular economy, how to do business in a climate emergency. So just to say, I'm really with you on the importance of this and how to bring together the business frame of like the role that business has, because I think this was an important point that you made in your introductory comments, but also, you know, building on what Kate has said, the interdependence of business. And, you know, this is about a system change, especially when we're talking about circular and regenerative economy, like it's business working in partnership with government, with NGOs, with civil society, with academia, with media, with artists, with designers. And to answer your question, I'm actually really hopeful, because I think there's a lot of people that are really waking up. They're understanding how this sort of economic model of closing the loop and contributing back to the systems that have been deeply, deeply impacted by the systems that have been in place to date. And like, that's the regenerative piece. So there's people that are really kind of tuning into it. I think the thing that we all need to get better at is understanding how we are interdependent, interconnected, and figuring out the ways to build really effective, really strong, and really like race to the top partnerships and collaborations. And again, I'm hopeful because I'm seeing more of that. I'm seeing really, really great initiatives where even like competitors are coming together to work together, knowing that not one of them can actually change the system on their own. There's a real recognition of the power of many and of coalitions of the doing. So I'd love to share more on it, but I think you've asked the right question, which is around what is, where is this transition to the circular economy happening, and being aware that it's this kind of systemic transformation is not, it's not an easy path, but it's the really important one we need to be on, and we need to be on it together. Did I answer your question, Marina? Was that okay?
Yes, thank you.
So my question is to Kat. So especially the Asian countries, population, overpopulation, and often the government is facing the problem to provide employment to millions of people. How in this post-COVID-19 world, the organizations can take steps, can drive the change to integrate the nature and the business, as well as to provide the employment to the millions of youths? How do you see the future in this post-COVID-19 world? Thank you.
Was that to me? Yeah, okay, great. That is an excellent question, and a really challenging question, I think, for everyone to try and address the shift that we're facing, and it is affecting so many different industries, whether it's from aviation, which is a massive employer, to the fact that we need to move to a world where the planes do not rely on the fuels that they rely on currently, and we need innovation in every place. And I think when we rebuild, we have a phrase in the UK which is build back better, and recognizing that actually the shift that we need is actually coming at quite an interesting timing of how do we recognize the impact that COVID has had, and when we build back and when we think about the investment that needs to happen to rejuvenate the economy, how do we ensure that it's in green, very broadly, green places and innovation and jobs and funding those things. So whether it's through government funding and innovation, which we've kind of touched on quite a lot, or recognizing that there are some incredible organizations that already exist that need better funding. Or if it's actually just recognizing that there are industries now that are tiny that actually need to expand a lot more. And I think, there's huge opportunity there. I think regenerative agriculture is fundamental to our future. The soil degradation that we've seen, I think the opportunity that we need to think about, although offsetting isn't the answer, what does carbon capture look like? What does insetting look like? What does planting trees and recognizing, mangroves and the opportunity that comes there? So how do we create employment to safeguard the natural resources that we have? And I think that focus on that hopefully goes hand in hand with the recognition that actually maybe being more stationary, maybe we're recognizing the world that we live in is far more important than we thought before, especially when this pandemic, who knows when it will properly end, who knows when we'll be able to move around again. So what's close to us, what can we do, and how can we have a positive impact?
Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you, Steve, for organizing it, and Marina and Manoj for your incredible framing upfront of sort of the challenge to the private sector, and for your great questions. I think in just sort of closing, I would just say, we are so excited to find ways to work more closely with young people to create the tools that will help businesses go from thinking about the climate emergency to acting on it. So I would just love to stay in touch with anyone who's interested in tuning into what we're doing with the B Corp movement, but actually also acting with us. And whether it's you have an interest in some of the playbooks or toolkits we're developing, or have ideas for other ones that you think will be helpful to help move businesses further, faster together, please get in touch. And I would just say a giant shout out to the work that Kai is doing to mobilize young people. So if you haven't seen the work of Youth Set the Agenda, if you haven't tuned into some of the ideas about getting youth onto boards, definitely check out some of the resources that are being mobilized right now. I think one of the big things we all need to do is build much more interdependence across actors, across industries, but also across generations. And so this intergenerational dialogue and action is critically important. So thank you for this intergenerational conversation. And I'm hoping it's the first of many that we can have together.
I really enjoyed this conversation, and as Shah said, it's really important to have that interconnection between different generations. And I think kind of riffing off on that point and the idea of the fact that we're all interconnected, we're all interdependent, I think that's so important, and a recognition that actually climate change and the climate crisis is going to hit different people differently, and whether that's the youth or whether it's actually in the developing world, and recognizing the importance of climate justice, I think is fundamental. And Kai kind of touched on this, and recognizing the need for the developed world and those who can to be able to make change and to you know, upend their business model if needs be, to ensure that we safeguard our future, because actually our planet will be all right in the end. It's the human species that actually won't be. And kind of with that, recognizing that, you know, we need to make sure that we act now and we ask more questions. And I think the idea of regeneration, which Shah touched on, is so important. So whether that's in looking at soil, whether that's looking at our food processes, or whether that's looking at plastics and packaging. And the only way we're going to create that change is by asking more questions, as Kaya mentioned. And if we are so integral to our future, and that every person needs to feel that there is a responsibility that we have to be able to ask those questions. So although I talked about kind of the digital footprint of everything, actually Kaya mentioned that, you know, actually let's use that now for the short term to apply pressure to ask more questions. And I think social media, although it has its challenges, really creates an opportunity for us to ask open questions that other people can see, that businesses can't shy away from. And I think it's a really important tool. So thank you very much for having me, and really looking forward to the rest of the discussions.
Thank you all so much for having me as well. It just makes me really happy when I hear just how many young professionals are going into climate mitigation and adaptation work. I mean, that's right, the single most important thing you can do in your life is your job, right? 800,000 hours or something. And so it makes me really happy to see that other people are joining me in this. I didn't think that I was going to become a climate professional when I was younger. I was very involved in social justice and different kind of politics, and I just thought this is the number one thing that I have to focus on for my career, right? The next 10 years. I'm 28. So I wanted to leave with an action, because I think it's really important that people feel empowered in all these discussions. And so the work that Oxford is doing right now, we've been reviewing, we're doing a global stock take of net zero commitments worldwide. So that means at the corporate level, we take the Forbes 2000 list of largest companies around the world, and then we've been looking at cities and states as well. So really trying to see what are people doing voluntarily to get to net zero or commit to a net zero target, you know, whether they're calling it a climate neutral target or a carbon neutral target. And how does that fit into the global race to zero, which I have to give a shout out to. So the COP process, where nations come together every year. Sorry, you can't cough during COVID. The COP process, where nations come together every year, is informed by often a global stock take of how far the private sector or civil society is willing to come. So when nations come to negotiate, they think, well, am I going too far if I agree to an ambitious climate target? So what's so important as part of the COP process that people recognized a while back is that we have a global campaign. So the UNFCCC has this spin-off group called the High Level Climate Champions, and they are running a global campaign to get everyone to set a a race to zero target, so a net zero target. So we're looking at all of the commitments out there. And what I find really difficult is that, every day I'm talking to people like most impacted by climate change, and I'm talking to business leaders who are leading, like the B Corps. The B Corps represent an astounding majority of the current corporate race to zero commitments, because they work in coalition together. They are a network that has an existing learning culture between each other. And they all said, let's do this together. Now, if you know of a business network, whether it's about something completely different, whether it's just like the healthcare association or the accounting association, right? There's business networks for all kinds of reasons everywhere. If you know of one or are a part of one, pose the question, can we go to net zero? It's just time for us to do this. So I would just end with the call to action that whatever business network or business you're a part of, maybe you're already a sustainability manager and you're doing it within your own business. How many people who are leaders of businesses can you bring together to join the race to zero? And in order to join, there's multiple avenues, but you can find out on the Race to Zero website, which I think comes up if you Google it right away.
It was pretty inspiring. Wow, I learned so much, and I hope everyone that is watching also had a great time. For me, it was amazing how we can have commitment in different levels. So it doesn't matter where you are, what you are engaged on, there is something you can do to make it better, to commit with these climate challenges that we have been facing. So I think that as a final message, I would like to invite everyone to think, what can you do different today? What can you do different this month to really make an impact? So either it's pressuring the companies you work for, it's pressuring companies you use, it's changing your habits or engaging in organizations, because we can all act, we can all make a difference, and if we do it together, for sure our impact is gonna be much bigger. So let's do it together.
And all the panelists here, and I think they have been inspired. I mean, on a personal note, I have been inspired a lot, and hope whosoever is listening to us today, they all have been, they are motivated to take some kind of steps at a local level and to act on a global level later on. This is what I feel today. And I feel most important about the climate change professional is the human values. Whether the human beings will be affected by the climate change or not, but more than 60% of the wildlife has been extinct, right? So we really need to think about each and every species, living on this planet. And when we are thinking about them, then definitely we are going to take some kind of steps to tackle the climate change. This is what I feel. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you to our panel today. Thank you so much, CHARMIAN, Kate, Kaya, Marina, and Manoj, for sharing your time, your perspectives, as well as these inspiring examples and stories from peers across the private sector, taking radical action in face of the climate emergency. I invite everyone listening to please visit the Day of the Climate Professional site, where we are collating resources that have been discussed here today during our panel. And please stay tuned for the next session on integrating climate change with other social movements, with voices from Rezama Brazil and Fridays for Future Portugal. Thank you all.